Hello. Hello, police. Yeah, what's the problem, sir? We just drove down our farm track. Yeah. Going through our pheasants. We come across a Range Rover with 3 people in it. Yeah. It appears that they're dead. I don't know what's happening. Blood in the motor all over them.
And welcome back to a new video on the Essex Boys case. As always, if you are enjoying the content, please do give the video a thumbs up. And if you're interested in the Essex Boys case, or simply true crime in general, don't forget to hit the subscribe button below. Around the same time that her lover was dragging Kevin Whitaker's lifeless body into a ditch, Tony Tucker's teenage mistress, Donna Garwood, was desperately trying to get hold of her man to give him a special birthday treat. The pair had met more than a year earlier at Raquel's nightclub in Basildon, where Tucker controlled the door staff. The pair began a passionate affair, and Garwood quickly became besotted, telling friends that she had met the man she wanted to spend the rest of her life with. "In my eyes, Tony wasn't the drug baron or villain he was made out to be," she says. "He used to say, 'They don't know me, so who are they to judge?' When we met, we just clicked and that was it. He was very romantic and showed me what life was all about. We used to go riding together and were always laughing. He was a little kid at heart, really." Though Tucker had no intention of leaving his live-in lover Anna Whitehead, he had become equally infatuated with wild child Garwood. He set her up in Pat Tate's old flat in Swanstead, and the two spent as much time together as they possibly could. At first, he tried to keep her well away from his business dealings, rarely discussing anything when she was within earshot. But it soon became impossible. It wasn't long before the teenager knew most of Tucker's business. Despite her tender years, Garwood took easily to the role of mistress. She got used to not having her lover on tap whenever she wanted, to meetings being cancelled at the last minute and unexpected. She also got used to never ever calling him at home, to ensure that Anna never found out about them. Instead, if Tucker's mobile wasn't on, Garwood would call one of the other members of the team, all of whom knew about her, and ask them to pass the message on. Although Tony Tucker, Pat Tate and Craig Rolfe were the main driving force behind the firm, as their gang had come to be known, there were a handful of honorary members who were allowed to mingle in their social circle and became privy to many of their activities. One of these was Stephen Ellis, given the nickname Nipper because at just 5 feet 5 inches, he was dwarfed by his companions. Ellis was the type of bloke who gave the business of crime a bad name, having picked up a handful of convictions for silly little robberies. His greatest moments came after he broke into a dry cleaning shop and stole a whole £100 from the till. He was caught but escaped from Southend Court, dislocating the shoulder of a policeman on the way, and went on the run. A few weeks later, he was caught red-handed as he tried breaking into a home improvement centre. Crime was obviously not Ellis's strong point, but he had some useful contacts, was funny and good company, and the trio warmed to him. Pretty soon he had become part of the furniture and was tagging along everywhere the firm went. As the morning of Tucker's birthday, the 17th of November, became afternoon and then early evening, Garwood gave up leaving messages on his mobile and called Ellis to try and find out where he was. Ellis, coked out of his head and in a playful mood, couldn't help but make a joke of it. Tucker, probably giving his old lady one. Yeah, probably shagging her up the arse right about now. It wasn't what Garwood wanted to hear. When she eventually spoke to Tucker, she told him how much Ellis had pissed her off. By his own admission, Ellis knows the remark was well out of order, but then so was Tucker's response. Tony thought he was the big hard man, the one who everyone respected, and I'd embarrassed him. The most he should have done was come over and give me a slap, tell me not to talk to his bird like that, to show her a bit of respect, Ellis said later. Instead, Tucker, with Rolfe in tow, went on the warpath. Still buzzing after the murder of Whitaker, the pair turned up at Ellis's house, where Tucker stuck a loaded pistol in his temple and threatened to kill him there and then. As Ellis cowered in the corner mumbling apologies, Tucker and Rolfe took their anger out on his house, smashing up everything apart from the television and video, which they decided to take for themselves. Finally, as a final act of savagery, both men defecated on the living room floor and spread their shit over the walls before driving off laughing hysterically. Pat Tate had missed out on the first round of festivities, but once Tucker told him what Ellis had done, he was keen to join in. Tate had always suspected that Ellis had grassed him up over an incident where the firm had smashed up a grocer's shop and beaten the owner when he tried to break up a friendly food fight a couple of weeks earlier. This was his chance to get his revenge. Ellis was not to be found at his own place, so Tate and Tucker decided to drop in on his parents. They threatened his father and told him they planned to cut off the fingers of Ellis's 15-year-old sister one at a time until he was man enough to face them. "There was nowhere I was going to take that," says Ellis. "I couldn't look after myself, but when they started threatening my family, that was going too far. I went out and got myself a gun and a bulletproof jacket, and then I went after them. I was coked up and whizzed up and I had it in my mind I was going to kill him. I wasn't scared. The thing about Tucker is that at the end of the day he's just a bully. I've seen him shit himself when a gun's pulled on him. I've seen him get beaten up. I've heard him say, no more, please. I might only be small, but I knew I had to stand up to them. And I knew I had to get all three of them. If I only killed one or two, then the others would come after me. It had to be all three of them." The exact details of what happened next vary according to whose version of events you deem most reliable. What remains certain, however, is that in the early afternoon of Sunday the 20th of November, Tucker and Rolfe made a complaint to the police that as they were on their way to a Dagenham snooker hall that Tucker had booked a birthday party for, they had been confronted in the street by a screaming Stephen Ellis who brandished what looked like a sawn-off shotgun at them. With no weapons of their own, they had no choice but to make a humiliating retreat. An hour or so later, while Pat Tate was in the bath at his £120,000 Basildon bungalow also getting ready for Tucker's party, a brick came crashing through the window. He peered out to see what was going on and immediately saw a handgun being pointed directly at his head. As the gun was fired, he instinctively threw his right arm up in front of his face to protect himself. The bullet entered at his wrist and travelled up to his elbow, shattering bone and tearing out lumps of tissue as it went. The would-be assassin stepped forward to fire again and finish the job, but his gun jammed, so he turned and fled. Later, as he was carted off to hospital, Tate was asked by a friend if he could identify the gunman. Tate nodded and claimed, "It was Nipper Ellis, Stephen Ellis, and he's going to die." News of the shooting spread like wildfire. Ellis's standing among the Essex underworld was soaring rapidly, while Tate and Tucker were fast losing respect. At Tucker's birthday party later that day, only around 20 people turned up. The previous year there had been more than 200. The rest fearing a massive gun battle might erupt in its midst. Darren Nicholls states, "I heard on the grapevine that Pat Tate had been released from prison and that someone had shot him. So remembering what a great bloke he was, I rang Mick Steele to see if he had a number for him. I finally got through to Pat on his mobile. He had taken it with him into the hospital. He seemed really pleased to hear from me. I arranged to go and visit him the next day, taking 4 bottles of lager as a kind of well done for not being dead present. Just before I left, I happened to mention to a friend, who also knew Pat but not that well, that I was going to see him. He told me to say hello, and remembering Pat's obsession with bodybuilding, asked if he could find out if he had any steroids for sale. I was really looking forward to seeing Pat again, but within about 30 seconds of getting to the hospital, I realised he just wasn't the same bloke I used to know. He was really arrogant, noisy and right off his face on something or other. He then started going on about how he was going to set up Nipper Ellis and kill him, and how people were smuggling drugs into the hospital for him so he didn't have to go without. It's like a party in here every night. You should come by again later. My mate Tony will be here. I'd love the two of you to meet." When I mentioned a mutual friend who wanted the steroids, Pat suddenly got really excited. "How much does he need? You tell him as much as he wants. I can get the lot for him. Truckloads. Does he just want steroids? I can get the lot. Ease, Whiz, Charlie, Puff. You tell him no matter what he needs, I can get it. I'm the man." Maybe it was the drugs he had taken. Maybe it's because I hadn't seen him for such a long time that I'd forgotten what he was really like. Or maybe getting shot in the arm had affected his brain. Either way, the bloke in the hospital wasn't the Pat Tate I remembered. He'd gone from nice bloke to total wanker. Later that same day, Mick rang me up and asked me to go over to his bungalow in Angers Green, as he had some work for me. I'd spoken to Mick a couple of times since I'd been released, and I'd bumped into him once, but this was the first time we'd had a chance to catch up properly. We were standing in his kitchen, and he'd asked if I'd seen Pat and what I'd thought of him. "Listen, Mick," I said. "No offence, right? Because I know this guy's your friend and all that, but I really didn't like him. He wasn't the same Pat I met at Hollesley Bay. He seems to have turned into a bit of an arsehole." Mick just laughed, then asked if I'd mind going over to his mum's house in Point Clear to have a look at her central heating which was playing up. Once we got there, it was obvious the whole lot needed to be replaced, and Mick paid me to do the work. We spent a lot of time chatting over the next few days, and in some stupid way, it was a bit like being back inside. I felt like we were becoming mates, all over again. No one had seen or heard of Nipper Ellis since a couple of days after the shooting. The firm, desperate not to lose face, were desperate to lure Ellis out in the open. They changed tactics. Rather than threats, Tucker left sympathetic messages on Ellis's answer machine, saying that there was no point in any more violence, that Pat wanted him to come and visit him at Basildon Hospital so that the whole thing could get sorted out. Even Ellis wasn't stupid enough to fall for that one, and stayed well away. A couple of days later, a nurse making up Tate's bed while he was in surgery found a handgun hidden under the mattress. Tucker had smuggled it in, and the plan was that the second Nipper Ellis walked through the door, Tate would execute him and then the gun would immediately be smuggled out and destroyed. But it wasn't to be. After the gun was found, Tate had his parole revoked and he was sent back to finish his sentence. Furious that he had ended up going back to prison because he'd been the victim of a serious crime and was trying to protect himself. A few days later, Ellis was arrested in possession of a Smith & Wesson handgun. He was also found to be wearing a bulletproof jacket. Although he was the main suspect for the attempted murder of Pat Tate, forensic tests showed that his gun was not the same one. Instead, Ellis was charged with illegal possession of a firearm and a few weeks later sent to prison, where he continued to receive death threats from friends of Tate on an almost daily basis. Darren Nicholls states, "I was seeing quite a lot of Mick, and I would drop in on him when I was in the area. About a week after Pat had gone back to prison, Mick called me up and asked me to go round to see him. I found him at Tate's house, where he was building a low wall and laying a driveway in the front, just as a favour to his friend. Mick said he had something to show me, and we both went to sit in the front of his car. He then pulled out a bar of cannabis resin out of a bag and asked whether I thought I could sell it for him. Now, believe it or not, I'd never touched cannabis in my life. My wife smoked it all the time, but I'd never even tried it. I was always more of a drinker than anything else. I told Mick that I didn't really think I could do anything with it, but he told me to take it anyway and see how I got on. If I had no luck, I could just give it back to him. If I did sell it, however, it was down to me to fix the price. Mick wanted £600 for the bar. Anything else I made was mine to keep. As I was leaving, Mick explained that Pat Tate had been working on some drug importations, and now that he'd gone back inside, he'd asked Mick to look after them for him. If I did manage to sell the stuff, there was plenty more available. I went back to Braintree and made a couple of phone calls and a couple of appointments. And that was it. I'd become a drug dealer. Not only that, but I seemed to be pretty good at it. It turned out that virtually everyone I knew either smoked dope or knew someone who wanted some. Once I'd put the word around, people started coming in and out of the woodwork all over the place. I'd let them try a little bit. Once they realised it was good stuff, they'd all buy some. I'd sold a lot within a couple of hours and made about £200 profit. Any doubts or dilemmas I had about getting involved in the drug trade vanished the moment I felt that money in my hand. I took Mick at his word so far as the supplies were concerned and went to see him the next day. And the next. And the next. Mick Steele also offered Nicholls work of a more conventional nature, though even that eventually revolved around drugs. Having rented a little factory unit in Brightlingsea, Steele asked Nicholls to wire it up for him. He explained that he was buying a boat so that he could get back into smuggling and he needed the unit to make a few adjustments. The boat was a 21-foot black and orange Humber Attack, a type that Steele had owned before and knew well. Once in the unit, his first job was to build a trailer so that he could tow the boat around with his truck. Steele could have bought one for around £2,000, but he decided to build one himself so it would meet his exact specifications. It was the same with the boat itself. Having bought it for £13,000 cash, in a false name for a friend to prevent customs from finding out, Steele ripped out the insides and built his own seating and navigation console from sheets of stainless steel. Then he bolted on a 150 horsepower Yamaha engine and built some extra fuel tanks, again from stainless steel. The tanks were pressure tested to ensure they wouldn't leak and baffled to prevent the fuel from slopping around too much. Finally, he sprayed the whole lot dark metallic blue. I saw it when it was finished and it looked absolutely brilliant, says Nicholls. It was a total work of art. Despite dropping hints like crazy, Nicholls wasn't asked to take part in the sea trials. Instead, Steele took Jack Womes and Jackie Street down to Clacton and put the boat through its paces. It performed brilliantly, the only cloud on the horizon being the engine, which while powerful used far much more fuel than expected. At one point in the trials, Jackie Street needed to use the toilet, so Steele docked his boat at the marina so she could use the one at the nearby yacht club. While he and Jack were waiting, they started chatting to a man on the other side of the jetty who had a smaller, less powerful speedboat. "I like your boat," said the man. "What do you use it for?" "Oh, diving. Made all the console and tanks myself," said Steele. "Your boat's pretty good too. What do you do with that?" "Oh, this is the firm's boat," the man replied. We're testing this one to see what it can do and how fast it is." As he spoke, 3 other men in dead-glow waterproofs walked down the jetty and got into the man's boat. "What is it you do?" asked Steele. "I'm a customs officer," came the reply. It soon became Steele's favourite anecdote and a constant source of amusement. If that's all they've got," he would tell who was ever willing to listen, "they'll never catch me." Smuggling with a boat was a return to the old ways for Michael Steele. He had started out in the early 80s with a 33-foot motor cruiser, which he would sail over to Ostend once a fortnight or so with his friends Peter Corey and Paul Gwinnett. Once there, he'd buy up a ton of old Holborn from a small tobacconist shop near the harbour, load it in the boat and then sail back to Britain. A skilled navigator, Steele had no trouble finding his way from Belgium to a remote part of the Essex coast in the middle of the night, and he never even came close to being caught. It became such a regular thing that the harbour master knew all the gang by name. He thought they were simply moving the tobacco up the coast to another shop, and Steele, ever the ladies' man, ended up having an affair with the wife of the shop's owner. Once the route and technique were well established, Steele switched to smuggling cannabis. Steele rarely bought the drugs himself. Instead, he worked as a kind of import agent, smuggling on behalf of others and charging them £330 per kilo, regardless of the size of the load. For the sake of easy mathematics, he preferred to bring the cannabis into the country in loads of 333 kilos. That way, each trip netted him and the rest of the gang a cool £100,000. Customs had been aware of Steele since 1987, when they received a tip-off about his tobacco smuggling. But it was only when Steele used the profits from his cannabis trips to invest in a £38,000 single-engine Cessna and started making lots of short flights to Holland that Customs decided to take action. Having discovered that Steele was now a major player in bringing in tons of cannabis to the East Coast, Operation Waterski was launched, and Steele became the target of a major surveillance operation. But Mickey the pilot, as he had come to be known, was too clever for them. Realising he was being watched, he devised a cunning plan to outwit his pursuers. With pressure on their own resources, Customs couldn't afford to follow Steele all the time. The plan was to catch him red-handed flying in a consignment of drugs, so all they had to do was watch his plane. Steele's next move was a masterstroke. He bought a second plane and kept it at a different airstrip. He would leave his house and see the customs car tailing him in the rearview mirror. Then as they saw him travelling in another direction from the airstrip, they would break off the pursuit and leave him be. Within just 3 hours, Steele could fly from the other airstrip to Holland, pick up a consignment of drugs, land in a field somewhere in East Anglia, and be back at home with Customs thinking that he had probably just popped out to a supermarket or something. Steele's humiliation with Customs finally came to an end in May 1989 as Steele arrived at the Albert pub in Colchester to hand over his latest consignment. A 2-man team in a single car had tailed him since he had landed, but a split second before the backup could arrive to arrest him, Steele spotted the officers and sped off. The customs team tried to ram Steele off the road, but he managed to get away from them, crossing the central reservation and driving the wrong way down a dual carriageway at up to 80 miles per hour. Steele spent weeks in hiding and might have avoided capture forever, were it not for his mother having a heart attack. Steele's mother is your typical little old lady, who goes to church every Sunday, and since the death of his father, the two had grown incredibly close. When the police discovered she was unwell, they suspected that Steele would be willing to risk everything to see her, and began staking out the hospital. They were right. When Steele reached the ward, dozens of policemen were standing around on guard. One came up to him. "Who are you?" he asked. Steele didn't miss a beat. "Oh, I'm Jeff, I was just looking for my wife." The policeman stood aside. "OK, son, off you go. We're looking for someone else." "Hope you catch him," said Steele, walking off towards the door. Steele was in sight of freedom when another officer who had paid more attention to the briefing suddenly went ballistic. "That's him! Grab him now!" In court, Mick was charged with 10 counts of smuggling. He pleaded guilty to one, the one he had been arrested for, but denied the other 9, and in a classic display of honour among thieves, swore that Jackie Street, Paul Gwinnett and Peter Corey, who had been captured on film helping Steele unload the goods, had truly believed he was bringing in tobacco. As a result, they were all acquitted, and Steele was geared up to take the rap for the whole lot. As the case unfolded, Customs produced surveillance pictures that they claimed showed Steele at work. But Steele pointed out that they were wrong. The pictures couldn't have been taken when or where Customs said they had been. In fact, it looked as if some of the pictures had been taken weeks later than it was claimed. Slowly, the evidence against Steele started to collapse, to the point that only one case remained against him, and that was the one he had pleaded guilty to. He could never be sure, but Steele could not escape the feeling that if only he'd pleaded not guilty to all the charges against him, he might have got away with it. The judge sentenced him to 9 years and ordered that the court seize £120,000 in cash, half his former marital home, £15,000 from his mum's house, his 33-foot motor cruiser, his £38,000 aircraft and his Toyota Land Cruiser. As he stood in the dock listening to the judge take away his liberty and everything that he had worked so hard for, he swore to himself that if he ever ended up in court again, he would never go guilty, no matter how strong the case against him seemed to be. He would always deny everything, fight, 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 until the bitter end. You've been listening to Blogs 19, written by Tony Thompson. This book is available to purchase online at Amazon and other online book retailers. Many thanks for joining me for this video. Very shortly you'll be able to see some other videos from the channel, including the Essex Boys playlist, which has all of the videos concerning this case in one convenient folder. If you like this video, please do give it a thumbs up. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. I look forward to seeing you all again in the next video. Take care. Cheers.